Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, filling in for Alex. I'm going to be here the rest of the show, but I'm going to be joined at the top of the hour with Anthony Gucciardi, and we're going to take some of your calls at that time. And later in the show, Jakari Jackson is going to be joining me. We're going to talk about the burgeoning police state, among other issues. But first, I want to talk about Thanksgiving a little bit. You know, at Thanksgiving, we had the pilgrims, which actually literally means travelers or somebody on a journey. They left where they were in England and later in Holland because they didn't like the society. They didn't like what government was doing to their families. They didn't like the oppression, and there was a lot of oppression. Whether it was religious or other issues, oppression is still oppression. And so they packed up and they left. Now, today, we can't really do that. There's not really anywhere left to go. That's why we're here. That's why we're fighting. I think all of us here at the staff at InfoWars know enough that we would be probably bugging out if there was any place to bug out to, but there isn't, and there's no place for you to go either. So we have to do something about this, and we have to take care of our own families. One of the things that these people found when they came to the U.S., they realized that they didn't know how to even grow their own food. They were pretty much dependent on the society that they lived in. And many of us are in that same situation today. It's time to start taking that back. You can go to InfoWarsStore.com and you can get the survival seeds. We have an InfoWars Seed Center. It has the widest selection of non-GMO, non-hybrid heirloom seeds available. And we've got seeds there from My Patriot Supply, Emergency Seed Bank, Heirloom Organics, and ARC. It's something you can do for your family, and you can teach others. You can teach people who are friends and family. You can be basically Squanto to them. You can teach them how to survive. Because, you know, it's not just a matter of leaving society. Our shaky infrastructure could leave you at any moment. You never know when that infrastructure is going to go down, and you could be in the same situation as the pilgrims who were starving through that first year until they finally figured out how to grow food. Right now, you've got the time. And you want to start with the very best material. That's why you should go to InfoWarsStore.com. It helps to support our operation. That's how we support our operation. We give you products that will help you in your life, and it also funds our operation. It's a win-win situation. Now, last week, as Alex was in Dallas with the crew, and they were protesting First Amendment because that was really the issue. We've been lied to for 50 years about what was going on with the Kennedy assassination. They don't want people talking about the real facts. They don't want people questioning the silly story that they're putting out, the narrative. It's obvious that there's a cover-up. People could see that 50 years ago, and for 50 years, they've got documents that they haven't released. For 50 years, I've been told the documents were burned, destroyed, that they didn't take any notes of the interrogation of Lee Harvey Oswald for 12 hours, that they took no notes whatsoever when they're investigating the assassination of a president. None of this rang true from the very beginning, but it was about more than that. It was about the fact that they were shutting everything down for the 50th anniversary, even to the ridiculous extent of paving over the X that marks the spot. You know, the fellow who found the Zapruder tape, who got it out of the Congressional Committee, once that surfaced, they were not going to show that to the public. And when he put that out there, he's been there ever since selling. Robert Groden has been selling information about the assassination to people, giving them information on site, fighting the Dallas city officials who are continually moving him away, arresting him. He's got a lawsuit going on now. And he put an X and has continued to put an X as they remove it at the spot where Kennedy was shot. So people can go there and see for themselves whether or not that aspect of the assassination is being correctly reported in the official story. But of course, even that they wanted to get rid of. And they went to such extraordinary lengths. It was absolutely amazing to see that not only did they not just pull up the piece of tape, they said that they were afraid people would trip over a piece of tape on the ground. So they didn't just pull it up. What they did was they continually paved over that section of road. They didn't just pave over it once. They were working on it the entire time of the commemoration to basically keep people off of it and to keep him and others, to keep Groden and others from going down there and putting the X back on. It was an amazing piece of censorship. And then it was followed up, as we were in overdrive, it was followed up with the police, unprovoked and without warning, coming in and attacking Alex Jones, the protesters that were with him, the staff that were with him, after they'd been led into the area by the police, standing there calmly waiting to get access a little bit farther in. Then they were attacked by all of these goons, essentially, from the federal police. We can see them coming out of the Homeland Security trailer and just walk up and start punching and shoving people. And as I was driving home, after I'd just seen this, I hear on the radio for the first time this story about this student down in Bastrop, where the police just walk up and without warning, according to the family's lawyer, that's what the family is alleging, and that's what a lot of the students are alleging who walked out. They had a walkout there at the high school in Bastrop, which is just a little bit south here of Austin. And the other students walked out in disgust and in anger that this would happen to another student there. There was a fight. He was standing around. He didn't get out of the way as quickly as the police wanted him to get out of the way, so they just tasered him. He fell, lost consciousness, as this often happens, just like with the knockout game. If you are immediately clocked or lose consciousness with a knockout game, or you're hit with a taser, you hit the concrete floor. Many people have been seriously injured. At least one person has died from the knockout game, and this is happening all the time with tasers. It's essentially the same thing. It's the police playing the knockout game. And what the police said, this is amazing. They haven't talked much because, of course, this is an open investigation. But what they said was that he looked as though he were ready to fight. See, if you even give them the wrong look, they feel justified to taser you. And what's making this worse, we see this happening all the time throughout the country. Just a little bit farther south in San Antonio, we now see that an officer has been arrested while he was on duty. He raped a young woman on the squad car. He's 40 years old. I think the lady was 19. And a 19-year-old woman just raped her on duty as a police officer, pulls her over and rapes her. And then this story, this is one that broke on Ben Swan's site. Cops spray a woman's vagina with mace in order to punish her. In order to punish her. Again, this is New Mexico. We've seen a lot of stuff coming out of New Mexico lately that's absolutely amazing. My wife looked at this story and said, we are never going through that state. People in New Mexico need to try to get a hold of their police departments and control them. But, you know, it's not just New Mexico. I wish it was just New Mexico. This is happening everywhere. Those first two stories I just talked about, those are right here in Texas. There is no accountability to the police. It doesn't matter what they do. There's no accountability to them. Between the unions and between this club that they've got going, nobody is ever held to account for these crimes. And as long as that happens, these things are going to continue to multiply. Now, in this particular instance, she was in a jail, and they were taking her to a detention center, and the staff did this to, quote-unquote, punish her. They said it's tantamount to torture. This is the ACLU talking about it. It's tantamount to torture. It's just maliciousness. The wanton disregard, the wanton maliciousness that the corrections officer demonstrated. This is the kind of chemical that is intended to be sprayed on other parts of the body to cause pain, but to spray it on the very most sensitive part of a person's body only doubles the pain. It probably is even more than doubling the pain. It's absolutely amazing, and it's exactly, you know, Alex was just in here talking about the Hunger Games, and you see there the arrogance. That was the thing that was bothering me about the live broadcast from Dallas, even before they came out punching. And that was to see how the police were so incredibly arrogant with anybody that wanted to talk to them. Ask them a decent question. Ask them a question about where something is. Give me directions. Or even after the event, when Alex asked them, where do I file a charge? I've just been assaulted by the sheriff's deputies. And they were incredibly arrogant. In most cases, they wouldn't even make eye contact with people who were talking to them. And it isn't just the fact that they were there as part of a demonstration. I've seen that over and over again. And as we were talking about last Thursday, when Jakari Jackson and I went down to the Austin airport to try to talk to the TSA, they stonewall us. They tell us, we're not going to talk to you. You have to submit questions. Of course, when we submit questions, they don't respond to us. When they come up and talk to us, they say, we're not going to talk on the air. And these are the public information officers. That's what their job is. Their job is to inform the public. Their job is to talk to the press. They are arrogant and contemptuous. And it's when you see these types of things happening, that they've done to these women, that they've done to these children, it's not surprising to see them do it to people who are protesting for the First Amendment. I've got to say that when we look at this First Amendment protest in Dallas, and we look at the Second Amendment protest that we went to down in San Antonio, the police were not afraid to come after a lot of people, even though we had a lot of cameras there. Even though we were broadcasting live, maybe they didn't know that we were broadcasting live. I would think that they would. We'd been saying that we were doing that. And at the time that they did that, we had 1 million people watching just on the YouTube, on the Ustream channel. It actually crashed Ustream. Now, if you go back and look at those videos, it's kind of interesting because Ustream doesn't count the number of people that were watching it live. They only count the number of videos, number of views of people that are watching the archive version, but they could see it on the screen. They snapshotted the screen. We had 1 million people just on that stream, not counting people who are listening to our broadcast or listening on the radio, because we were in overdrive at that time. Some of the radio stations that are listening to us right now were not on there at that time. Yes, Alex.
But we will never be mainstream. If we had 1 billion listeners, we're not important.
That's right. That's right.
People that the government certifies, they are important.
That's right. That's right. And it's interesting to see how, that was Alex hopping in here and making his comment. It's interesting to see that the mainstream media essentially ignored it except to attack us as conspiracy theorists. And remember that that was a term that was created by the CIA in the wake of the Kennedy assassination. And that was used as a deliberate method to make people, to ridicule people, to turn it into an ad hominem attack, to ignore what's actually happened. And we've got a video here that I want to play for you. This is a special report we had on the nightly news. And that's something, if you're not supporting the nightly news, you really need to consider that. It's coming up Christmas time. It's a great gift for people. You can see every one of the documentaries that Alex and crew have made. And if you saw that clip at the beginning that Alex put together with Darren McBreen and others, that was an amazing piece of work. And Alex has been working on this next documentary. It's going to be coming out in the spring. We have a wealth of information there. They can watch our documentaries, all of them for free, as well as get a nightly news broadcast. So that's something that, just a little plug there, you can share that at Christmas time. It's a great gift for people. But let's go to this report that I did for the nightly news about government conspiracies and cover-ups. Well, 3 years after an MI6 codebreaker's body was found padlocked in a bag in an empty bathtub in an MI6 safe house, the London Metropolitan Police have ruled that it was an accident.
Allow me to congratulate you on a brilliant bit of deduction.
That's right. Move along. There's nothing to see here. But there is plenty to see here about how governments work. His body was found inside a zipped and padlocked bag in a bathtub. No palm prints were on the side of the bathtub. No traces of his DNA on the padlock outside of the bag. His cell phone was wiped clean that day. And his employer, MI6, that's British intelligence, didn't report him missing for 8 days, despite the fact that his body was in one of their safe houses just blocks away from their headquarters. And just last year, the coroner concluded that he probably was killed by another person. Coroner Fiona Wilcox said that it was, quote, a legitimate line of inquiry that other spies were involved in the death of Gareth Williams, 31, a member of the UK's Secret Intelligence Service, SIS, also known as MI6. But Metropolitan Police said he probably died accidentally on his own, rejecting conspiracy theories. His family said, if this wasn't the SIS and it was the Cray twins or someone else, you would be investigating. You would have gone into far more detail. And there were some more details thrown in. He had $30,000 worth of unworn women's clothing, a bright red wig, and some suspicious sexual things there. But the coroner's investigation ruled that he was not gay, not a transvestite. Those things, I believe, were simply red herrings to distract people from what the real question is, and that is, how could he have gotten padlocked into the bag? The Press Association reported that a former parachute regiment reservist who specializes in rescuing people from confined spaces was unable to lock himself inside an identical bag. No palm prints were on the side of the bathtub, no traces of his DNA on the padlock outside of the bag. He said, I couldn't say it's impossible, but I think even Houdini would have struggled with this one. This is something we've seen not just in the UK, but frequently in the United States, that people who have sensitive information about government secrets or about the people who run the government somehow just mysteriously die or commit suicide, even though they didn't have any history of being suicidal, and even though the explanations for their deaths make absolutely no sense. Take the case of Gary Webb, investigative reporter who supposedly committed suicide by shooting himself in the head twice. It was merely coincidental that he had exposed CIA and Reagan administration using the crack cocaine drug trade to finance Nicaraguan Contras. Or take Deborah Jean Palfrey, the D.C. madam who had perhaps incriminating information on very powerful men in Washington. She said this on the Alex Jones Show in 2008, shortly before she was suicided.
I have no intention of letting anyone buy me off or make any kind of a deal with me.
And you're not planning to commit suicide?
And I'm not planning to commit suicide either.
But you want to put it on record that you're not planning to commit suicide?
No, I'm not planning to commit suicide. I'm planning to go into court on April 7th if indeed we do have the trial, and I plan on defending myself vigorously, and I plan on exposing the government in ways that, I do not think they want me to expose them. I want them to explain to me in open court why they came after me.
Or take Aaron Swartz, a feisty internet freedom activist who led the defeat of CISPA.
We did it. We won. And then we started rubbing it in.
We're told that he hung himself, also in a fit of depression, concerned about the possibility of a long jail term sentence. He asked his fiancée to marry him just 2 months before his death, 2 months after federal prosecutors came after him with ridiculously trumped-up charges for downloading files from MIT which neither the repository nor local law enforcement wanted to prosecute. And the prosecutor, Carmen Ortiz's husband, had tweeted that he had refused a plea bargain for just a 3-month sentence. Or look at the improbable details in Michael Hastings' death in a car explosion. He was being pursued by the NSA and the FBI for a story that he was writing and had warned colleagues that they would be questioned. And then there's the JFK assassination, where the lies are even more obvious after 50 years. But of course, if you question any of these improbable stories, you're labeled a conspiracy theorist and told to shut up. For InfoWars Nightly News, I'm David Knight. And he said, of course, there's also the person in Arkansas who was found with his arms and legs sawed off, and they ruled that was a suicide as well. You know, there's so many of these, we don't have time to do them all in one report. You could do an entire documentary on government suicides. But it's interesting to see how they followed up on this spy in a bag story. They used the media. They had the media come in and film a woman who was a yoga instructor, about 4 inches shorter, quite a bit lighter, and she was able to get herself in that bag and lock it. But she still wasn't able to do it without getting her fingerprints and DNA on the outside, and that's the way they fake these things. We've seen this over and over again. If you want to know why this is going on, and you ask questions, you want to investigate, you're a conspiracy theorist. We're going to be right back. We're going to have some analysis, not theories.
Everything we said came true. Everything we've done's been right.
Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, filling in for Alex. Alex is here. He's working on the documentary. He just popped in and said maybe they could get that lady that got in the bag where they had the spy in the bag. We just had the report last segment of a spy who they found locked in a bag, padlocked from the outside, no fingerprints, no DNA on the outside, and Scotland Yard brilliantly ruled that it was an accidental death. Even after a year ago, the coroner came out and said the obvious, that he had been murdered and put there by somebody else. And Alex had mentioned this Arkansas about the guy who was found with his arms and legs sawn off, and the police ruled that that was a suicide. Maybe they could try to get that yoga instructor to duplicate that trick. I don't know. I don't think that's possible. But getting on to something serious here, you know, we were talking about, Alex came in at the beginning of the program, was talking about the Hunger Games and how that is the kind of economic collapse and then feudalism that follows, where everything is owned by just a few people and everyone is in such desperate straits to eat, to survive. That's already started in Greece. That's already started where they've put the Goldman Sachs bankers in charge of the government there. And we have this story here that is on InfoWars. It's actually originally an RT story. And they're talking about the World Health Organization going in and reporting that since 2008, they've had this massive rise in HIV rates. And what they said is that half of these new HIV infections are self-inflicted. Well, why would people give themselves AIDS? The World Health Organization says this is to enable people to receive benefits of 700 euros per month and faster admission into drug substitution programs. If you look at the article on InfoWars, there's this picture that a photographer took of this old man humped over and walking along. He just came out of a €1 store. It's kind of like a dollar store over here in the U.S. And this fellow he wrote about, he took his picture and put it as it's an epic picture. It looks like something out of the Great Depression. And it looks like something that we may be facing here in this country as well. In Greece, the photographer, wrote this accompanying information. He said, unemployment is 26%, and by the end of the year, it'll reach 34% of the active population. And he said, this is the kind of unemployment that is only noted in countries that have typically been facing long-term wars. Well, see, it's unusual, but this is a long-term war. As Alex is pointing out, this has been their plan for a very long time. When he interviewed Professor Woods, and we're going to have that in a rebroadcast on Thursday, and they were talking about neo-feudalism. And he mentioned that this was something that they, even as far back, of course, Alex mentions it goes back to the middle of the 1800s, but even in the 1930s, they were talking about changing the credits from money-based system to an energy-based system. And if you notice, that's what they're trying, on the 100th anniversary of the Federal Reserve, if you look at what these carbon credits are, in my opinion, what that is essentially the Federal Reserve and this private corporation being able to charge interest to anybody that has, as money is created, this private cartel gets to charge the entire United States population interest for every dollar that they print. And they, of course, decide how many dollars they're going to print. In the same way, if we allow these private carbon credits that Al Gore and his partner Blood and Gore, and others are trying to set up, if we allow them to do that, if we allow them to change everything over to this energy system that they're trying to do, they will measure everything that we do. It's going to be much more lucrative for them. It'll be global. It's another way of establishing, in my opinion, a global Federal Reserve. And that's exactly what they were planning in the 1930s. 40 years before they started talking about global cooling and then about global warming. This predated the environmentalist movement for a long time. This is a long-term war. We're going to be right back.
Why is nascent iodine so important?
Nascent iodine is so important because it goes directly to the thyroid. It's not bonded to a salt, which means it doesn't have to be broken down, and it's the most usable form. It's what the body uses. It's what the body is designed to use. If you have low energy levels, if you have pains, if you have thyroid problems, if you don't feel up to par, well, they've proven now that the fluoride and a lack of iodine causes a decreased IQ because you have all this stuff that builds up inside your system and builds up and builds up. And that's why some people, when they start taking iodine, will have what's called a Herxheimer reaction or a detoxification reaction. But that's a good sign. That means you're detoxifying all that fluoride buildup, the mercury buildup in there, the bromine buildup in your system, and the chlorine buildup in your system. You don't want those things. All of those things have been proven as carcinogens. That's one of the reasons prostate cancer is on the rise too, is because prostate takes up iodine, and the men that are lacking iodine causes the prostate to become cystic and causes the prostate to swell and eventually leads to prostate cancer. There's been an extreme rise in polycystic ovarian disease, PCOS, with women, fibrocystic breast disease, because iodine is stored in the breast tissue, the ovaries, the prostate glands in men. It's utilized by every single cell in the body.
Why does this almost taste good compared to other iodine that tastes horrible? That's because it's real iodine atomic form.
We wanted something that's going to go straight into the bloodstream and straight into the thyroid gland. We wanted to put it in a vegetable glycerin base. That's a USP kosher certified vegetable glycerin base. And that product is not tested on animals. It's vegan friendly. It's gluten free. It's GMO free.
Of all the things I've done, nascent iodine was just absolutely amazing. So we developed with Dr. Group a double strength, low price, InfoWarsLife.com Survival Shield, the atomic nascent iodine, available right now.
Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, filling in for Alex. I'm going to be joined in the next segment with Anthony Gucciardi. He's going to come in here. We're going to talk about political correctness. You know, we talked about how they try to demonize and do ad hominem attacks on people, calling them conspiracy theorists. And that's a technique that started after the Kennedy assassination. It was a way to shut down people who were trying to investigate what really happened. The government did everything it could to cover it up. They offered us implausible explanations, and we have seen that happen over and over and over again for the last 50 years. They set the pattern up with the Kennedy assassination, and we've seen that happening over and over again. Of course, false flags and government conspiracies and cover-ups predate the Kennedy assassination. Obviously, we've seen this in cultures throughout history. We've seen it with the Reichstag fire in Germany. But it's a very carefully planned and orchestrated partnership with the media. Operation Mockingbird. You see them talking about people as conspiracy theorists, as long as they start throwing that term at people, they don't really have to explain away what we're talking about. They just basically attack us as conspiracy theorists. And that's what we see happening in Dallas. That's what the Dallas Morning News did to the demonstrators, to Alex Jones there. They simply talked about how there were some people there, and there's one fellow in a 1776 costume, another guy who was holding a puppet. And then they just talk about Alex Jones, and he's this conspiracy theorist, never talking about the fact that there was censorship going on, never talking about the shutting down of the First Amendment. And this is a newspaper. But that's okay, Dallas Morning News. We will fight for the First Amendment. We'll fight for your right to say what you want to until you wake up, until you get off of the government payroll, until you start trying to not suck up to people for access, until you want to honestly report the news. You know, the guy who was there with a puppet, maybe he was having a good time. Maybe he was kind of making a point about puppet media. Who knows? But we're going to be talking to Anthony Gucciardi in the next segment. We've got a lot of news here. You know, it just came out yesterday. They said that the troops are going to be in Afghanistan for another 10 years. Well, if you go back and you look to the Independent, back in 2006, you had a British general saying at that time, that was 2006, troops will be in Afghanistan for the next 20 years, is what he said. And it was kind of interesting. It was Brigadier Butler, and he said that international presence may be required in Afghanistan for the next 20 years. This was back in 2006. And then in the same article from the Independent, it's very interesting because they talked about how opium cultivation was rising at that time 59% per year, according to the UN figures, an all-time record crop. And they point out that 90% of the heroin on British streets was coming from Afghanistan. 90% of the heroin worldwide is coming from Afghanistan. It was down to only 10% on the Taliban. Once we went in and established it, it jumped to 90% of the world's supply. And of course, they say that it's in this article that it is #1 priority. This is back in 2006, 7 years ago. They said, you can say that Afghanistan is pretty much out of control, said someone with the UN drug program. He said, Afghanistan is basically supplying the world's opium. And there's also evidence that the country is increasingly hooked on its own opium, and they're going to have NATO troops and their Afghan allies attack heroin labs. Well, you know what? That didn't happen. As we saw with Geraldo Rivera, what the U.S. and NATO troops did was they actually helped them. They actually transported the drugs for them. They actually helped them in the poppy feeds. That's why they're there. It's not just for this quote-unquote war on terrorism, which is going to last forever. It's not going to be 20 years. It'll never end. We're going to have to end it. We're going to have to end it by returning the government to constitutional checks and balances. We're going to have to end it by waking up. But it's not going to end. They went there for the heroin. It funds their special secretive ops, and it's also one of the places on Earth that has the highest concentration of lithium. Now, lithium is not used just to control people psychologically, but it's a major component of batteries. And so we've got a lot of resources there that the New World Order, the neo-colonialists, the neo-feudalists want to have. It provides funding for their black operations. We're going to be there for a long time, but we're going to be right back with Anthony Gucciardi. We're going to be talking about political correctness, so stay tuned. Now you can watch the InfoWars Nightly News streaming live as it happens for free.
Check it out at Infowars.com/show.